Then we just set these from opposing angles. As soon as there's some stress in the system, right, down she goes. So once it's in, right, up it goes. Hey, it's Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap. I recently did a video contrasting two different types of snares that have a mechanical mechanism that lifts the snare up. The spring snare, where you've got a bent pole that springs up, and a tip up, where you've got a pole that is attached to a point, and it through leverage, right, you've got basically like a fulcrum, and it levers the thing up, right? And I argue that the tip up is more reliable for northern climates because it doesn't freeze in place. You're not worried about, you don't have to worry about the bent pole losing its spring, because you've got you know, maybe single-digit temperatures during the day, negative, and double-digit freezing temperatures at night, which can affect the way the pole acts. But another problem that I said was unique to both of those types of mechanical snares is where the actual trigger is, where the you know, you've got the snare and you got a little thing that's hooked onto something, and when the animal struggles, it becomes unhooked and goes up in the air, right? So that mechanism, that trigger, for both of those, that trigger can actually freeze in place. So you get enough snow and enough ice and a sunny day and then a really cold night, it can freeze in place and it might not come loose, and the animal might break the snare off or whatever, right? For whatever reason you want that spring snare for a quicker, more humane kill, or to minimize the chance of a predator finding the rabbit when you go looking for it, or whatever, right? Or you're in a survival situation and you just, everything has to, you get all kinds of time but no food, so everything has to be completely reliable because you need the food, whatever the situation is, right? Both of those types of snares have that flaw where the actual trigger can freeze together if the conditions are right, and it won't actually spring up because it's frozen in place. So what I got here is a better tip up, okay, a tip up that solves that problem. It can't freeze together. Well, you have to have an insane situation where it would freeze together. It's also easier to set up because you don't need to rig up a trigger mechanism. When you make these mechanical snares, it's setting up the trigger that takes, it's all the, you know, finagling around, regardless of what mechanism you use. They all require either cutting 7 notches or sort of clip or right angle type things, or various types of toggle type scenarios, right? All of these things can fetch up, can freeze in place, and can fail if conditions are right. Here's one that will not fail. And the great thing about this one here, if you had to, it's not legal where I live, but let's say you had to for whatever reason, you can scale it all the way up. Right? You could snare anything with this if you had to, right? But it's probably not legal anywhere in the civilized world, but if you had to, right? Anyway, let me show you here, okay? We got a pole here set for a tip up, right? It's tied on to this tree using some bank line, just using a jam knot. And you know, right, the heavy end of the tree is at, there are 2/3 of the trees at the far end, and when the animal you know, gets caught and struggles a little bit, the mechanism released, that end goes down and the end with the snare goes up. Okay, all right, so the great thing about this setup is all we need to set the trigger is just 2 sticks. They can be dead, these do not have to be sound sticks, okay? Just 2 sticks. 2 sticks, I just got these laying off the ground. They were dead rotten trees that had already fallen down. 2 sticks, you know, the height somewhere between 4, 5, 6 feet high, okay? Maybe 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet high, okay? Now, what we do is we move the pole until we get the snare just where we want it. And then we just set these underneath it from opposing angles. Just enough to carry the weight. I need that to go up a little bit. I'll move this back a little bit more. That's pretty good. Okay, so that's in place. The great thing about this too is it won't move around the wind too much either, because you've got basically a tripod type setup, not a bipod, I guess you'd call that, right? So let me show you this from the other angle. All right, so here at the other end, we got our snare set. We got her fenced in, right? What I've done here is I've attached a stick to the main pole. You could attach the snare to the main pole, but I find it easier to get the main pole close. There's just so much messing around with that end of it, right? That it's easier just to get it close and then attach something really light and fine to the end so you can get it right in position. Just tie it on with a couple good knots, like a jam knot, and then put it there like that. So there's no trigger at this end, right? The trigger's at the other end, and this is just waiting for something to go through it. So we're here at the end of the pole where the trigger is, and all the trigger is we've got two sticks I just picked up off the ground, and I just precariously attach them to the pole, right? You want it as precarious as possible. You would not want a V-notch in here, right? You want it so that as soon as there's some sort of stress at the end of the pole, these two come loose and fall down, right? That's what you want. The pole gets lifted or it gets moved either way, and one of these comes loose, and of course then the other one comes loose and the whole thing falls down, right? So it's sort of like a bipod type thing, right? You look at it from the back, but you can see I've got pole the snare's attached to and just these 2 points of contact using whatever you find on the ground, right? So it's a very easy trigger to set up. Okay, so we got a scenario. Our little bunny's sort of walking along here, gets itself in the snare, right? And then struggles a little bit, tries to get free, right? Goes this way a little bit, goes that way. Whoa, up she goes. I'm terrible at filming this, my God. Let me just reenact that, right? So once it's in, right, up it goes, right? So just give you a sense of how this, how the action went at the other end, right? As soon as there's some stress in the system, right, down she goes. Right, that's it, right? So you may not think a little rabbit has the strength to put enough force on this to dislodge the two posts that are holding it up. But remember, from the point where it's attached to the vertical tree, the fulcrum, to the point where it's attached to the snare, right, which in this case here we've got 5 feet, more than 5 feet, right? The strength of the rabbit, or whatever's in there, is amplified by that length, right? It's got leverage. You know, from in terms of trying to move the tree that's over there, everything from this end down is a lever. So the rabbit doesn't have to be that strong to get to, you know, because it takes very little effort, because look how these are just barely attached, right? Okay, and to speak to the point I made earlier about things freezing in place, ice and things like that can form around these, okay? But if you've got something pulling it to the left and to the right, again, there's a lot of force in the leverage applied to that. It'll break that. There's just so much more working against whatever. If this stick freezes to this pole, there's, as soon as something gets the pole moving to the left or the right, there's a lot of things acting against whatever tiny bond is formed in ice there. Way more than if I had some little tiny V-notch, or, you know, some 7-notch or whatever, something like that down here where it could freeze solid. Because, you know, just think it through, right? All right, so the snare is a bit messed up because we already set it and my hands are too cold to reset it. But yeah, as soon as the rabbit starts pulling on this and starts struggling, right, just a little bit of downward pressure is just the tiniest bit of downward pressure is all that's needed to dislodge those two sticks, right, and up it goes, right? So anyway, just another way of thinking about a tip-up snare if you're in a situation where you need one, and if it's legal where you are snaring. You know, different kind of trigger mechanism that is unlikely to freeze up and easier to set up in certain regards, right? Especially once you get the hang of it, because you don't have to fashion a you know, some sort of delicately, wood-crafted mechanism. Also, all these things are things you have to take your mittens off to do, right? I mean, it's not that cold today. It's like -2 Celsius or something like that. It's quite windy today. I don't know, hopefully it's not messing up the audio too badly. But every time you have your hands out, especially when you're holding cold sticks and holding cold, it just takes the heat right out of your hands, right? So you want to, when you're setting snares, you want to have your hands out of your mittens or your gloves for as brief a time as possible, right? So if it's really cold and you're setting all of these intricately little carved traps, that's only, you think about if you're trying to snare for volume, you're trying to feed yourself, trying to get a lot of food, it can eat up a lot of time, and you might spend a lot of time just standing around with your hands down your pants, trying to get the feeling back into them and not snaring. So these are all things you have to bear in mind, right? But anyway, just another little trick to have in your back pocket, the sort of bipod tip-up. Let's call it that, bipod tip-up, because that's kind of what it is. It's a bipod, right? That it's not attached in any way. So you got a pole and you got a little bipod, and the slightest bit of destabilization, the two sticks fall down and the pole comes down and lifts it up at the other end. Very useful trick, very useful setup for a tip-up snare, and completely scalable if the need arose. If you needed to do that, it could be, but you would have to be a life or death situation, because you'd probably be breaking a law. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.